Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Motivational Millennial podcast. Today we are speaking with Skylar Wilson, who now makes his journey by sharing wilderness excursions and vision quests with others. So stay tuned for his incredible perspective and journey. Before we jump into the interview, I want to let you all know I have been in coach training for coactive coaching for over a year, and I'm about to finish up my certification. I'm really excited about this, but I need a few more hours in order to do that, and I'm looking to hopefully speed that up a little bit. So I really would love to offer you listeners a really amazing opportunity to sign up for a lower cost, what was I calling them, crazy low cost packages.
Get yourself a crazy low cost coaching package.
Insert cool buzz phrase here, but really the whole thing is that, just a really mutually empowering and supportive thing. I would love the opportunity to be able to support you during any kind of change, transformation, or if you're feeling stuck and need some support. And also, I would love the support of helping me finish up certification a little bit more quickly. So if you are interested in checking that out or exploring more about coaching and that potential partnership, you can email me at Ivy, that's IVY, at motivationalmillennial.com. Or you can go ahead and just jump in and sign up for a sample session. I do a free 30-minute session where you can just check it out and see what it's like and ask any questions that you may have. And you can sign up at motivationalmillennial.com/IV sample. And all that to say, we're excited to have you here. Stay tuned after the interview for the after show, and Blake and I will share our biggest takeaways.
Let's do it.
Hello, and welcome to the Motivational Millennial podcast, where we talk with inspiring members of the millennial generation who are living life with a sense of purpose and achieving their dreams. I'm Ivy LeClaire.
And I'm Blake Brandis.
Our Motivational Millennial guest today is Skylar Wilson. Skylar is the founder of Wild Awakenings, a conscious community of changemakers dedicated to the thriving of Earth, life, and humanity. He is a minister in the creation spirituality tradition, specializing in guiding sacred wilderness immersion experiences, also known as vision quests. For the last 3 years, Skylar has directed transformational events and retreats for thousands of people around the country, including the Cosmic Mass, an intercultural healing ritual that builds community through dancing and the arts. Welcome to the show, Skylar.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Ivy and Blake.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So we'd love to hear more about what you're up to and what you love about it.
Well, I just finished a Wild Awakenings vision quest, leading one with my partner, Jen, and we went down to Death Valley. We got back, I think it was 2 days ago. And so when I'm not leading vision quests or wilderness immersion experiences, I've been writing on a couple writing projects and leading retreats and events, like my bio said, the Cosmic Mass and other types of retreats at Esalen and the Esalen Institute this past summer and in the Grass Valley area / the Bay Area.
How is it for you going from those, what sound like really intensive events, and then coming back into more daily life? I'm just interested because it seems like you've done that a lot over your career. And does it feel like a challenging transition, or is it pretty natural at this point?
It always feels challenging. It's always culture shock. There's always a process of change. And I find that it's just trained me to get better at accepting and surrendering to difficulty, to pain sometimes, and to challenge, and being open to that, to going from one extreme to another. And I've actually come to rely on it now because it helps me to kind of ground and to be in different environments and different settings. But it's always challenging, I would say.
What kind of things do you notice when you're coming back into mainstream society each time that maybe when you're out of it for a little bit, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird how we do that? Or like,
yeah. The list is long. I mean, really everything. I mean, It's like going, if you've ever traveled to another country, especially out away from the West, like to maybe China or Africa or, a place where English isn't the dominant language and really everything's different. The wilderness is the same. And it's like going back to ground zero of like where our culture came from. And it's also a kind of like, it puts in perspective, like some of what I would call the dysfunctions in our culture. It makes them much louder. So for instance, fast food, traffic, all of those kinds of things, coming back into contact with those, it's always a bit of a culture shock. And kind of, it feels violent, actually, physically violent and emotionally. But there's also an acceptance that I have for it since I've done it so many times. But there's also a longing to kind of, in some ways, it's easier to be sort of, I guess, the archetypal Garden of Eden story of like back in the garden, back in the perfect harmony of nature. And so I try not to let myself dwell in that story too much of like, oh, I miss the perfection of nature. I definitely always notice some discomfort when I come back. Just noises, smells, feeling bombarded by energy, bombarded by people, by what feels like lack of presence. And then there's always a kind of pullback of like, oh man, I want to get back out there. And after a few days, I find myself integrating and happy, to be back in my community and with the comforts and, of a shower and food and a comfy bed and all of that. So there's things that I love about being in community and culture and society and things that I can't stand about it. But, it's both.
So what was the most transformational experience that you had personally on a vision quest? Or, because I'm imagining that there was some inspirational personal experience that you had that got you into creating these opportunities for other people.
Yeah, I went to Canada when I was 13 to be part of a 37-day wilderness canoe trip with my mom's good friend. It was actually her first boyfriend. And so he still leads these trips. So I went on this trip, and day in and day out, we paddled, and we went, I think it was between 500 and 700 miles by canoe in northern Ontario. And about 3 weeks into the trip, one morning I got up extra early and I went to check out this trapper's cabin. It was this old building. And, we were out so far in the wilderness that we hardly saw anyone, maybe a Native American guy in a boat or, every once in a while. So I went out and checked out this cabin, and on the way back to avoid this mud, I went through the forest and I got lost, and I was lost for a whole day.
Wow.
My world was spinning. Like I said, I was 13, and all the things that were out of alignment in my life just became completely clear. My parents had just broken up and divorced, and there was just a lot of things that felt like they were out of alignment for me. All of that got clear, and my will to live got clear too. And finally, they found me. I did everything you weren't supposed to do. I ran around and I didn't sort of stay put, which is what you're supposed to do if you're lost in the wilderness. But luckily, I was found. And so I went out that night on the lake, and I was kind of decompressing. And I started to ask the universe, basically, some of like the key questions of like, what's my purpose? Like, why am I involved in such a painful situation of being alive? It's just all these things had come up to the surface. And then I saw a shooting star, and I didn't hear any answer back, but I just had this, like, probably the deepest sense of purpose that I'd ever felt. And, I took that directly to work with other people who may be out of alignment or lost in their lives, or maybe not, maybe just wanting to get to a greater level of clarity and kind of alignment between inner and outer, and between the wilderness and the inner wilderness of the psyche, of the soul, and purpose and community.
Is that what the experiences you're creating now with Wild Awakenings? Are they trying to achieve a similar goal? Obviously not getting necessarily lost in the woods.
Right.
But can you talk a little bit more about what that experience is like?
Yes. So there's some different format. They're not all the same. They're curated in different ways, but all of them have three main parts. They have a coming together part and kind of like an introduction / like getting to know one another, solidifying the group in the container. And then they have a separation aspect, which is leaving that community and going out alone. And there's different ways that we do that safely. And then there's an integration aspect, which is coming back and then integrating the experience of being alone with being back in your life in society. And basically, those are the 3 parts of the transformational experience. And all the programs have that in common. And there's so much clarity that can come from that process. My training was with the School of Lost Borders, and I've had a lot of other mentors as well, which we can go into later, but that process has kind of come from that.
You shared such an incredible experience at the age of 13 to lead you to this. So when you had that clarifying moment at 13, was it literally like, okay, I know exactly what I want to do now with life, and there was like this clarity, and you started on that path consciously at 13, or what did the transformation look like over the years from there?
Good question. It wasn't at all clear. And it was basically, I felt like at that moment, I came to a sense of wholeness or of home in the world, in the cosmos, in myself. And that became a reference point for me going forward. And I would say more so as a reference point of when things were off or out of alignment than when things were on. And I would continue when I would get lost again and again, or be in a job, which I haven't worked for that many other people or companies, but I have occasionally. And when that's been out of alignment, or it's usually the wilderness is where I go for clarity. So I would say it's been more of kind of organic unfolding process. It wasn't like the universe was like, here you go.
What is the biggest dream that you've achieved so far, Skylar? In what ways did you have to grow to achieve it?
The biggest dream is sharing in that kind of contact and presence and connectivity with others, with the world. It's feeling that together and creating a space that has that kind of presence. And so there's a lot of forms where I felt like retreats and spaces like this past time in Death Valley Vision Quest, where I felt like just a giddy sense of aliveness, and it's perfection, and it's not ever done. Like I never am like, okay, I can stop living now, but it's like a kind of, like I'm on my path, and it's almost like nothing else matters. It's just the mind falls away, and there's just a sense of embodied joy with being together. So I felt that way with others, with the group that we took out. And when others mirror that back to me or break down and kind of release all that they've been carrying and everything that's not working in their lives, and then come back to wholeness again with a sense of joy, that process itself feels like the most nourishing thing. And I think the biggest dream that I can aspire to, I don't have any other visions of what that's going to look like. I just trust that if I keep following the truth of my own process, that it'll keep creating that space for others too.
So really for you, it's that moment of perfection that you're experiencing for yourself, but then taking it to the next level and really witnessing it in others, and how that space that you're holding and creating for people can really transform their lives.
Yeah, and relating to it as a participant myself, even though I've done this, I'm experienced at doing this process and being in the wilderness or doing it outside of the wilderness. I feel like each time that I do it is the first time in some ways. And so it's relating to it again and again, and as a practice of coming back to wholeness.
Skylar, what's the most significant challenge you've faced so far, and what was it like to overcome it?
The most significant challenge I'm still overcoming. Last year, I decided to build a retreat center with a really good friend of mine, and we came up with the vision, and he bought the property, and we started building, and we jumped in, and just as we started to go through the whole process, it just became clearer and clearer that something wasn't in alignment. And for me, and the vision wasn't what we were fulfilling, what was being manifested wasn't what I had envisioned. And so pulling away from that project was one of the most painful and difficult things, I think, because it was such a core desire to create a space for these types of experiences that I'm describing. But I think that where I was out of alignment was the form, was that it was going to be a retreat center with all of these bells and whistles. And I started to kind of get more focused on that rather than the process of creating these kinds of experiences, which can happen anywhere.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because what I'm hearing is it sounds like maybe your initial vision was to have a place where you bring people together, and now you are realizing that it is more about creating those experiences wherever people are. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I would say for me, it was about my role. My role there would have been to be the director of this retreat center or co-director, and holding space for others to come in and lead retreats and to lead some of my own as well. But I just got really clear that what has the most use for me is leading retreats myself and holding in a variety of places. And so to be someone who brings people together, to bring preferably in ways that are new or that people aren't used to. So finding the edge of the unknown, the edge of the wilderness, as opposed to creating a retreat center where people come to the same place every time. Or does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I think The Edge of the Unknown is a great title for this podcast episode.
Great. Yeah, I love that.
So you said that you feel like you're still overcoming that challenge. What is supporting you, or what practices do you have right now that are helping you through that process?
One is grieving, and it's something that I feel like we as a culture kind of shun. And I know I've personally had a difficult time with that. It's just letting the emotions wash over me and making space to meditate and allow whatever emotions are in my body, in my heart, in my mind to come up and just release, and to do it for however long is needed. So sometimes realizing that I'm not done yet, but I've got to go to work now. So, coming back from work or whatever and making another space and time to go into it. And yeah, I mean, it can be anything from grieving loss of friendship, which can come when life naturally takes you in a different direction from someone, or just the grief of feeling apart from the world, apart from myself, which comes in times when I'm just confused and don't really know if I'm on track or, if I'm going in the right direction. Or, with my work, it's so self-directed that I have to continue to refine and redirect myself and smell or intuit where life's taking me. It's on a path that's laid out really clearly. So that involves some deep soul searching. And so I would say the most challenging, but also the most nourishing practice is to do that soul searching and to have my own inner map for, how to do that. One of those is grieving. So another is experiencing joy and making space for singing and dancing and yoga and hanging out with friends and communing with nature, and things that expand me. But what's the most difficult is when I'm feeling contracted, and finding a way to go towards that contraction rather than avoiding it and trying to just make things great all the time, which is my tendency and my desire, I think, like most people, to be happy all the time.
Well, it sounds like a really valuable tool that you're cultivating, because so many times when we are afraid of change, it's because, there's the unknown, but also because we're having to release things that we do know, right? That's going to be so difficult about change. And so really acknowledging that there is a process of losing, and knowing that you have this resource of, okay, I recognize that this is grief and that this is a normal part of the process or of change and transformation. It creates a great tool for you to use when you're facing difficult, challenges or moments of change in the future.
Yeah, which gives me the ability to take risks and to put myself out there, because there's this way of holding myself and asking for the support of the earth and the cosmos, as well as from my partner and from friends and family.
Skylar, what advice would you give to other millennials who are on a journey toward fulfillment and success?
Well, I don't like to give advice because I don't really like to get advice. But a suggestion or a couple suggestions that I have are that in my experience, the manifestation or the work or what I'm doing is always different than the way that I've imagined it and than the vision. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's off track necessarily. And so to just expect that it's going to look different, that the vision is going to continue to change and the work to manifest that vision is going to keep changing. So just to be up for the ride and to participate fully, even when it's going differently than I expected. And then the other is to show up for it, even when you're not inspired. And for me, what that looks like is being accountable, checking my emails, reflecting critically on what I'm doing. Is it working? Asking others, especially those I differ an opinion with, or I've had some sort of conflict or friction, for feedback, and to actually come up with some grounded way to put that feedback into action and to change. Because I think the most difficult thing is change. And we have all these ways of distracting ourselves or envisioning things differently than the way that they're actually happening. And I know for me, showing up in those ways, or I prefer to be in a dream state or a non-ordinary state of consciousness or in the wilderness where I'm just in flow with nature. And that's often not the way to change the world or to bring about a different culture. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is bringing about a different culture, one that's dedicated to compassion and justice, sustainability, and openness, realizing that there's things that nourish me and then there's ways that I can put that nourishment into action. And so there's a bridge there. And I would just suggest to hold it lightly, but also show up for the work.
So when you're experiencing those flow states and those connected states, how do you reconnect with those experiences or bring how you're feeling and the wisdom and intuition that I imagine is rather present in those experiences? How do you bring them into your day-to-day life, like you're mentioning, and when you kind of got to do more like tasky stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you bring that into your day-to-day life?
Yeah, good question. It's difficult, or it can be. And so I have practices that I try to be disciplined about, including meditation or just allowing myself to be present to my body, my breath, and thoughts and not get carried away by them, and just being mindful. Also doing qigong and yoga, running, exercise, anything like that grounds me before I start working. So I try to do that. And then just writing things down when I'm inspired and then keeping them someplace that's accessible when I'm not. And so I can access the informational components. Like sometimes when I'm in a flow state, it's easy to have clarity about something that when I'm in a more task-oriented state, I'm not open to the same inspiration, but I can still follow through with a vision or inspiration that I have had. So I would say just writing things down and also having my own practice for getting connected again and again.
Speaking of inspirational writing, is there a book or a quote that has changed the direction of your life in some way?
Yeah, there's so many, but out of all of some of my favorites are by Brian Swim, who is one of my professors at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He's a cosmologist and he has a few books. I really like The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos and The Universe is a Green Dragon. And just because he connects really poetically the science of cosmology or the journey of the universe, the furthest stretches of our imagination, to the most personal aspects of life. So I really like his books. I also like Soulcraft by Bill Plotkin because he gives so many practical tools for navigating the deep processes of transformation.
Which of your accomplishments do you feel surprised you the most? Like when you look back on it, you're thinking, oh my gosh, can't believe I did that or that happened.
Really, all of them. I mean, the fact that I'm leading Vision Quests now and that's working and I'm making a living doing that and find such joy doing that, and that it's so simple in some ways, but also so multifaceted and fulfilling. That, I think, is the thing I'm the most surprised about, because it came out of such a nonlinear process. It came out of being lost. It came out of wandering and in the wilderness. And so, yeah, I think that that's the most surprising thing. And also just being a guide for others, because I felt lost myself. And so it's kind of been a slow process of development. And yeah, it's always a surprise and kind of a shock to when things land, because I'm never sure.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you have sharing your journey and your amazing perspectives. Would you share with the audience where they can find out more about you and your work?
So wildawakenings.com is a good place. It's where we have upcoming events, vision quests posted. And our email for that is wildawakenings@gmail.com. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter. Also, Skylar Wilson at Facebook is a good place to find me.
Awesome. Skylar, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us. Yo, what is up, Motivational Millennial listeners? I am so excited to share with you that I'm going to be featured on a Creative Courage Summit, which launches on April 17th. It's all about unleashing your creative potential, finding your purpose, and creating the world that you want. There's some amazing other presenters, including David Allen, whose book Getting Things Done, aka GTD, is one of my jam go-to productivity books. There's also our friend Rochelle Sheik, who is the Koya founder, and a bunch of other dope millennial creatives, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. So you can check it out at creativecouragesummit.live. That's creativecouragesummit.live. On April 17th, they're launching a couple videos a day, and you can see me not only talk about radical acceptance and how it relates to getting in a flow state through freestyle, but also do a really cool exercise that I've seen transform so many young people's lives, and it's using metaphor, and I think it really makes a strong impact for anybody. So check it out, April 17th. Peace and love.
Hello and welcome to the after show for our conversation with Skylar. I really appreciated when he was talking about being in the flow state and being connected to that wisdom that you get from the flow state. And when he's sharing with us some practices about how he brings that into his daily life. One of the things that he mentions is that he can be in a really good, flowing, comfortable, connected mental state and have some really cool ideas, and then making a list of those at the time so that later, when he may not be in that state, he can still access that part of himself, which I think is really cool, because that part of ourselves that is ease and clarity and confidence and peace. Man, if we were all the Buddha or a Buddha, we could just be in that state all the time because we would just be there. That's not reality, right? So being able to consciously, maybe create some of those states or have that type of awareness daily, like he was mentioning, but also really appreciating and capitalizing was the first word that came to my mind, but, appreciate, I don't know what would you think of? Not capitalizing, that sounds
emphasizing?
No, I'm thinking of really just getting the best use out of those spaces as well. So here's an example. I have started to really practice being more comfortable with the fact that I shift from being super clear and positive to just being sort of normal in between, and then sometimes have low moments, And just recognizing that it's always up and down. It's always a cycle. I mean, we've heard this from other people on the podcast before, but to just really know it for myself and really acknowledge it for myself has been really good. And so the other day I was just in this really empowered place, mental state. And I was I'm going to put myself out there more on social media. And I recognized that I knew I wasn't going to feel that way forever, right? There's going to be moments where I'm really stressed out, or I don't know what the heck, how do I even write something because I'm too shy now all of a sudden, So I capitalized, I guess, on that experience, and I wrote a bunch of different posts that promote our work and what we're doing while I was still in that middle state, because I knew that later I was going to not always be there, and at least I've got some backups and stuff. And I think that that's really cool, because what's happening is that in those really peaceful, productive, happy mental states, it can be so good to either, I mean, in our instance, it's like you're thinking about writing down stuff to help you later for the business, but I also think it can be really helpful to write down how you're feeling and experiencing and the ways that you're viewing the world in that moment, and to really know that that wisdom is still available to you even when you're not feeling that way.
It's a good reminder to, as you say, capitalize or maximize whatever flow state you're able to get into. And I think that the same thing happens to me with working on music, where if I've got the studio computer up and it's running, I'm like, yo, just do everything I can right now. Same thing with writing lyrics, for example. If I'm in that creative space, I just say, just keep running with it. Because someone's like, oh, I've done a little bit, that's fine. So I think part of that flow state too is letting it run for as long as it can, because it's not going to last forever. And that's good. Like you said, it's part of the process and the cycle, but I really cherish and appreciate it when it's happening. And so I think if we can be aware of that when it's happening, and rather than saying, oh my gosh, it's going to go away, like, just say, wow, what a great opportunity to write this all down, or to do as much as I can in this space without coming from a place of scarcity about it, but really just a space of appreciation. Like, thank you for this opportunity to really focus or engage with this thing I'm working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what we don't want to do is cling to when we're feeling good, or when we're feeling productive, or we're feeling in flow, whether that's when we're out in the wilderness or we're just like really grooving on a project that we're working on. Because grasping and clinging causes as much stress and suffering as when you're just not feeling good, or when you're not feeling good and you're wishing that way of feeling was back. Both of those things are not about the present moment, and they're not allowing you to really appreciate what's happening and how you're being there. And I think it can also be super helpful, because then you don't have this expectation of yourself to always be in that flow state. And then it's like, why have I not been productive today? I'm horrible. I was the other day. Why could I not do it today? It's just because it comes and goes. It comes and goes, people. Like, your flow state comes and goes in the everyday life. And, I think it's also really important, though, to put yourself in a position where you are creating some of that flow state that's like different than when you're really being productive or creative, but like the connected state that comes from peace and silence. And that's kind of what Skylar is talking about, is when he's out in the wilderness, it's just him and the universe. And when you create that space for yourself on a weekly basis or a daily basis or a multiple times during the day basis, it's in a way sort of training your brain to feel that connection and feel that flow potentially more often, or to experience the peace that comes from non-judgment of how you're feeling.
Yeah, and that brings up the point I wanted to talk about from his conversation, which is this idea that when you're able to be out of the everyday hustle and bustle, and you are in those reflective, non-judgmental states, you can really gain some fascinating awareness when you return to your everyday life of the ways that we behave that are automatic. And we touched on this a little bit in the interview, but it reminds me of David Foster Wallace's beautiful commencement speech, This is Water, in which he talks about taking a step back and looking at, why do we do the things we do? Why do we value the things we value? Is it because we've chosen actively to value those things, or because they're inherited from the media or society around us, or our upbringing or our communities? And I think that's such a great reminder. And so much of what it seems like Skylar does is providing those spaces for people to disconnect from the automatic way we tend to live most of our lives, and to really reflect deeply on it.
Yeah, this is like coming full circle, because when I think about the flow state or the connected state or that peaceful state, how it can be jarring for me personally to go to sleep feeling super awesome and empowered, and then for some reason I wake up in the morning and I'm like freaking out about life. Why? What happened? So it can be jarring just internally when the environment hasn't changed, but I imagine it's particularly more jarring when your physical environment is changing, and the amount of stimulation that you experience when you go from being out in nature. I mean, I don't have to just imagine, like, I've been out in nature and, like, it's not like I totally have to imagine that, but...
Yeah, I was going to ask how your experiences with silent retreats in the past have affected you, both when you've been in them and then when you reintegrate into your daily life.
Well, I mean, it's done a couple of things. I have not been on silent retreats that are particularly long compared to what really exists. Some exist for months at a time. I have done 3 days. And even after 3 days, though, it really does shift your mind and perspective, and you feel kind of chill and floaty. I can't even imagine what it feels like to be in that state for a couple of months and be in that place for a couple of months. But, you know, the first time I went to one, I came back, and like 2 days later, there was this networking event. I was going to grad school at the time, and I had never felt more comfortable in my own skin. And I think it was because I was in this environment where there were no expectations. Nobody cared about whether or not I was wearing makeup or what I looked like. All of the things that we seem to really care about that are kind of meaningless were not really a part of the culture when you're on the silent retreat. And this is insight meditation or Theravada Buddhism silent retreat. So that's the culture that I'm referring to. And so there was that aspect of it. It was like somehow I saw my truer self, and then I was able to go to this networking event and just stay connected to that, and I felt a lot less shy and a lot less afraid than I normally do. I was like very much more outgoing. But I do still, even now, and I haven't been in a couple of years at this point, but sometimes I have a hard time remembering that. This may sound naive or something, but I just forget that most of us are not particularly aware or self-aware of what we're doing to others, like what we're creating. I value so highly kindness and vulnerability, and I spend a lot of time in communities and around people, not just silent retreats, but this is talk about cultural shifts, you know, and transitioning in between. And I spend a lot of time with communities that it's safe to be vulnerable. It's safe to cry. It's like all of these things. I mean, nobody thinks about it there, right? Because they want to be honoring you, the truth of you. And there are a lot of communities that do that. Sometimes I get thrown because I forget that we're not always able to see that and be a part of it. And it just makes me sad, like, is all, you know, not like sad as in like disappointed at people or something, but just that I wish that that was more mainstream and that really acknowledging ourselves in that way. That was such a huge, long response. Hopefully people like the sound of my voice. But I just...
Well, maybe they were using it for a little insight meditation of their own.
It feels like a palpable... Like I'm reliving the experience right now as I'm telling it, which is why I think I just got like into it. But,
no, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for asking.
As someone who hasn't been on a multi-day retreat like that, it sounds really powerful. And I guess my point of reference is probably going to live in another country for a while.
Yeah.
Especially a country with a significantly different culture. Like I was in Morocco for several months, and it really did make me notice so many things, both huge and cultural and as small and minute as most grocery stores in Morocco only had a few types of cereal, for example. And I went back to the US and there was an entire aisle filled with nothing but cereal. And that's just one of those shocking images when you really think about how we live in such a mass market consumer society. But that's a whole other piece. But not to get all existential or capitalistic. Those are all the wrong words. None of those were the words I meant to say. But overly comparative and sociopolitical, that was probably what I wanted to say. Anyway, this has been a very interesting conversation. Thank you for exploring.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to our awesome listeners. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. And we look forward to talking with you next week on the Motivational Millennial podcast.
Bye.
For show notes and upcoming guests, or to learn more about Coactive Coaching, the blog, and our other awesome offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
The Motivational Millennial podcast is edited by Christy Hostler and Team Podcast.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Blake Brandis.
Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!